Hello everyone, my name is Andrew Hampshire. In today's discussion, we're going to be studying sonnet number 18 by William Shakespeare. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? The objective of this lesson is twofold. The first thing that we're going to be doing is to understand what a sonnet is and a sonnet structure. And at the end of this discussion, your task will be to compose your own sonnet. Now, the way that we're going to go about this is to first understand what the poem is about. That's content. Then we're going to understand how the poem is structured. That's its form. And the last thing we're going to focus on is its aesthetics. And you'll have a better sense of what aesthetics means as we get into that section of our discussion. So without any further ado, let's do a reading of this poem. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer sleets hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is its gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou own'st, nor shall death brag thou wonders in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So we're going to look at the first section of the poem. The way we'll study this is we're going to break the poem up into two parts, and each part has subsections of its own, but let's look at the first part here. The first line says, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" And this introduces a question. So what is the nature of this question? It's a comparison. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? What are the two things that are being compared? Thee and a summer's day. So to make this a little bit more realistic, let's think about a boy in our class, Johnny, and a girl, Susie. Johnny is speaking to Susie, and he looks into her eyes and he says, "Shall I compare you to a summer's day?" And immediately after this, Johnny answers that question himself. He tells Susie, "You are more lovely and more temperate." Now, temperate means balanced, not given to extremes, and lovely, as you know, is something that is beautiful. So he already frames the discussion into two components. One is that Susie is more lovely than a summer's day, and Susie is more balanced, whereas summer is more extreme. So the way that the author, or Johnny in this case, is developing his expression to Susie is going to follow with his reasoning. So let's see what he has to say. He says, "Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May." That's a reason against summer. He says that summer is subject to rough winds that shake the darling buds of May. So that's minus 1 point for summer. And summer sleets hath all too short a date. Again, minus 1 point for summer. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines. Minus a point for summer again. And often is his gold complexion dimmed. Minus another point for summer. And every fair from fair sometime declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. Minus a point for summer again. So let's think about what it is that Johnny is doing. He's looking at Susie, and when he's comparing her to a summer's day, instead of saying wonderful things about her, he is saying negative things about summer. So his way to elevate Susie is not to raise her above a summer's day, but rather to diminish the value of summer and thereby relatively increasing Susie's value. But let's look at each one of these reasonings in its own right. We've spoken of the first one, which is that rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. In other words, there's something beautiful in summer, and rough winds come by and shake them. So this is not a temperate thing. If you remember the thesis statement or the answer to the question, he says, "You are more lovely and more temperate." And this is showing us that summer is not temperate. There is rough weather in it. It's given to extremes. What about the second point? Summer sleets hath all too short a date. Again, it is not temperate. It is too short lasting. It doesn't last forever. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines. Let's look at the expression the eye of heaven. This is an allusion. It is a reference to something else. It is an object that refers to another. In this case, the phrase the eye of heaven refers to the sun. And sometime the sun shines too hot. So again, not temperate. And often is his gold complexion dimmed. Again, another reference to summer, and also an allusion to clouds, which cover the complexion of the sun. So yes, you have this thing that is too hot, but it is also beautiful, and sometimes its beauty is clouded by clouds. And lastly, every fair from fair sometime declines. So beautiful things that do exist decline or die. Why? By chance or because of nature. Now that we focus on the structure, the first unit of the poem, we can focus on the second one. And the second one is primed by something called the volta or the transition. And it's the word but. So this already tells us that he's shifting his focus to Susie, and he tells her, "But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou ownst." So this is temperate. She is not transient, right? Her summer, her essence will last forever. Her beauty will not fade, and death will not be able to brag that her memory has faded after death. But why is that? And here is what Johnny does that is really clever. He says, "When in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee." He's referring to his own work, right? In a sense, the conflict of this poem is for, let's say, a young man to win over the heart of a young girl. And how does he do this? Well, he thinks to himself, right, well, I can compliment her. But this is rather simple, rather basic. Every guy can do this. So I'm going to write a poem. All right, well, that's a step up. Now, in this poem, I'm going to compare Susie to something that is beautiful too, and I'm going to say that she is more beautiful. So Johnny chooses a summer's day. And then he begins to say how summer suffers some problems, and those very problems that summer suffers, Susie does not. And then his stroke of genius is to make himself relevant or necessary to her beauty. He tells her that her beauty will last forever because he is writing about it. So long as lives this, and this gives life to thee. He immortalizes her in his own work. So now that we've focused on the content and on the structure of the poem, we can focus on aesthetic. Aesthetic is how it's your artistic creativity coming into play. And in a sonnet, one of those components is a rhyme scheme. So in a rhyme scheme here, we're taking a look at the last word of every line and figuring out if it rhymes with any of the last words of any other line. So let's take a look. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. Well, there it is. That's the first one. Day and May. And summer's lease hath all too short a date. Temperate and date, that's your second pair. So already we have an A-B structure. Now, we're not going to read the rest of the lines. Let's just look at the last words and see what we have. Shines, declines, dimmed, untrimmed, CD, fade, shade, ownst, roast, EF, C and V, G and G. So that is the rhyme scheme of the poem, of a sonnet. One more thing for us to consider. Let's count the number of syllables in each line. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? That's 10. Thou art more lovely and more temperate. That's 10 again. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. That's 10. And summer's lease hath all too short a date. That's 10. You can count the rest of the syllables in the remainder of the lines on your own, but you will see that each one of those has 10 lines. 10 syllables. Now, Shakespeare does a little bit of a trick here. let's take a look at the line, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. That is the third line from the end. When in eternal lines to time thou growest. So had Shakespeare chosen to spell out the word in full, it would have created an 11-syllable line. Now, his solution to this problem is to take the word growest, eliminate one of the vowels, and combine it into one syllable, growest. So that is the second element of the aesthetic component that we've discussed. So now that we've completed our analysis of Shakespeare's sonnet number 18, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, and we focused on the content, we focused on the structure and the form, and we focused on the aesthetics, your job is to write a sonnet of your own. You have to choose a theme, and based on the structure of the poem that we've studied, you understand that it has to have at least two elements. For example, you can talk about present and future. Next, it has to follow sonnet structure. In other words, it has to have 14 lines. In the first 2 lines, you have to introduce a problem and provide a solution to that problem. In the second component, you have to address the issue, and in the third, perhaps the solution to that issue. Then you also have to follow the rhyme scheme, in addition to the 10-syllable count per line. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I hope that you've enjoyed this lesson.